So welcome everybody yet again to another episode of the TurtleCoin podcast. I've got IBM CD here, and of course we've got myself, your humble narrator. So today we're going to be talking about pruning, a little bit of talk about triptych, and maybe we'll pop into some other topics while we're at it. IBM CD, how you doing, man?
Not too bad. Definitely trying to enjoy a little bit of this Ohio weather. If anybody knows anything about Ohio, the weather swings very quickly from cold to hot, especially during the spring months, but hopefully it's starting to calm down a little bit. So I'm doing a lot better. Sunshine's good.
I'm skeptical of what your definition of hot is.
Well, it varies a little bit. Like this weekend, I think they're calling for high 80s, possibly into the 90s, which I know is nothing to you Southerners, but to us, it's awesome.
Yeah, I can imagine, man. But I can't even begin to understand what kind of snow you guys probably deal with.
Yeah, it varies greatly. As not quite as bad as what you see in other parts of the Midwest and stuff like that, but we'll get the runs of the lake effect snow every once in a while with where I'm at. So sometimes when it snows, we get an inch. Sometimes it ends up 9 or 10 inches. It just varies greatly, but I'm sure that's quite a bit more snow than what you get down where you're.
So tell me about the prune crops you guys have out there.
The prune crops, man, I haven't seen any prune crops out here in a while. Closest I can get is blueberries by heading up into Michigan, but I can smell what you're dropping.
That was my best effort at a segue into the pruning discussion. That's all I've got. They don't hire me for the comedy.
Fine. That's fine. Hey, I've heard worse transitions for sure, but no, that works. So talking a little bit about pruning, we've mentioned a couple of times in some of the blog articles, and when we're referring to pruning, what we're essentially talking about here is when we take a look at a transaction that's stored on chain or obviously in the mempool, there's certain things that we can do to kind of trim those transactions up so they don't use as much storage space on disk, right?
Yep.
So go ahead.
So to what degree do we do any pruning, if any, at all today in our current code base?
Zero. We do absolutely no pruning today in the V1 code base.
Just curious,
there's no good way to pull that off, right?
Yeah, just curious. How big is our chain as of today? Like 165 gigabytes, something like that?
I try not to look anymore because every time that I do, it reminds me that I'm due to buy a couple more SSDs.
Oof.
Yeah, it's getting intense. Is probably the biggest problem here because at the whole point of the blockchain being immutable is that all of the data is there. So the underlying transactions, you see everything about those inputs, you see everything about those outputs, and then the signatures, of course, that sign off that, hey, look, I'm permitted to spend these funds to create this transaction, right? All that information is stored on disk or in the blockchain, so to speak, right? And it's got to be maintained for the entire history for a node to come online and validate past blocks and then ultimately validate new blocks and new transactions.
That's pretty painful whenever you think about how much it adds up to.
Oh yeah, it's insane. As you mentioned, it's 160 gigs and it's constantly growing. So one of the things that we've heard people kind of talk about, and obviously we've complained about it as well, is that there's got to be a better way to store this data, right? And make better use of that space or not consume as much storage on disk, right?
Yeah.
And that's really kind of where the pruning conversation comes into play because, like I said, there's no good way for us to pull that off in the V1 chain because today, every bit of that transaction data, like I mentioned before, the signatures, all the extra data, the inputs, the outputs, all of that data is required to be there to actually generate the transaction hash. And that's that same hash that you can look up in the Explorer.
Even if we trimmed out the extra, I understand, since it's hashed, you can't really pull things out that have been hashed already. But if things weren't part of the hash, we'd be able to trim a lot more out. And man, just trimming the extra out would be big for us.
Well, it would be big to a certain point. There were a lot of transactions, years ago that had a lot of miscellaneous data in them that it would considerably shrink that down, right? And even some of the spam transactions that we saw, about a year ago, give or take, that would have helped that. I don't have the exact numbers on how much data would be saved if we had the current extra data limits in place that we do today of, 1,024 bytes. I don't know how big of a difference that would make because at the end of the day, when we take a look at the actual transaction data, generally speaking, most of the storage that is used to store a transaction isn't actually that extra data.
Yeah, it's basically a lot of space is wasted doing individual signatures on every single input with, very inefficient signing scheme.
Correct. Most of that storage is consumed by those signatures. And I think I talked about this a little bit before in that, every input of a transaction requires a ring signature, as you just said. There's those individual signatures with a ring size of 4 today that we run. It's 4 sets of 64 bytes. So it's 256 bytes. Doesn't sound like a lot, but that's per input. If we take
per
a look
pixel.
at it, yeah, exactly. If we take a look at, what I'll call a normal or an average transaction, right? And we see that it consumes something along the lines of maybe 10 or 12 inputs, that's 2,500 and so on bytes that are consumed just via that. And then on top of that, there's also the pointers in there, or the offsets for those inputs that kind of point the validation of those transactions, the lookup, so to speak, as a reference back to the individual keys that are used in that ring signature. And that's not a lot of data there because it varies because it is variant and encoded. We talked a little bit about that before as well, but it still consumes space, and those offsets are only there as part of the signature. So as I kind of started thinking about, hey, how could we solve this problem in V2? I got to thinking, hey, look, if we reorganize the data a little bit and we construct those hashes, those transaction hashes differently, we can save some space.
So what trade-offs are we making by trimming so aggressively?
So probably the biggest trade-off here, in all honesty, is that this would not be possible, the way that we're going to be doing things if we were going with proof of work with V2. That would be a non-starter.
In what way?
So as we talked to, or as I mentioned before, the whole idea of proof of work is that you are able to validate the entire chain from start to finish. The miners do their jobs, the blocks that are submitted, all that kind of good stuff. It requires that you're able to read back over the entire history and follow and validate every single signature that is on every single transaction. And that's what makes proof of work, right? There's that constant validation that everybody's validating, everybody's doing that work, and the miners are doing their part. And if anything goes awry, then it can be called out and it causes a chain split, so to speak, that eventually gets resolved in a reorg, ideally, right? So that would be the trade-off. It's not possible, or not, I won't say not possible, but it's definitely less likely that you'll be able to pull it off with proof of work with the way that we're going to be able to do with V2, because we're doing, the delegated proof of stake.
That's definitely going to save us in a lot of different ways, and it kind of makes me cringe how against proof of stake I was in the beginning. I always looked at it as a make it, take it game of basketball, where the guy who gets the upper hand in the first 3 points is going to continue to hold court for the rest of the time. And it's definitely become the opposite of that. And I don't know if it's because so many other evils have cropped up that kind of added more contrast to it, or maybe just the different parameters that we've changed, especially with regards to delegation and selection. I wonder which of those made it more appealing over time.
I think it kind of goes both directions, in all honesty. In my mind, as we kind of thought about it over the last couple of years, or at least I've thought about it over the last couple of years, there were multiple advantages to proof of stake. We've always been in the battle, the last few years of trying to stay ahead of ASIC resistance and all those.
Yeah, we definitely paid our dues in that respect.
Exactly. Nothing like a soft shell coming up for a quick reference, right?
Dude, I forgot about that.
Yeah, it's or as our more familiar community members like to call it, titty hash.
Yeah, titty hash.
Yeah, now you remember. Yeah, thinking about those graphs, go flipping through the blog and find those again, right?
Yeah.
So the whole idea there is that we've tried to stay one step ahead of the ASIC developers and the people that have those efforts, in an effort to keep mining as fair as possible. The mining aspect definitely plays a major role there. It took about a year for the network to, finally get the hint that we shouldn't have hero miners in control of 70% of the hash rate. It finally started to level out over the last week or so, where
I'm kind of proud, but part of me thinks that hero miners just created C3 pool and moved half their hash rate over.
You'd think so, but the C3 pool is actually the same pool software as Monero Ocean, I'm sorry, Monero Ocean, and I don't know that the Hero Miner is spinning.
Interesting. I wonder what they're mining now.
No idea. But yeah, so the mining aspect and staying ahead of that, and trying to keep the network as safe as possible definitely played a role. As we kind of thought about it, that hey, look, this isn't working. And then there is the aspect of we can continually tweak the proof of work algorithm. We can keep trying to chase after that and try to solve this problem by trying to keep fair, by turning the knobs, and tweaking the settings. But it's a cat and mouse game, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's not one that we're likely to win or gain any significant ground on.
Correct. So, I mean, that was part of it. And then the other part was, we took a look at the chain over the last, 3 years and said, man, this thing is massive. I don't know how many times we had some conversations where it's, what would we do differently if we launched today, right? How many times do we have those conversations?
All the time.
Exactly. I mean, from the economic standpoint of currency emission to, hey, look, if we change the structure of the transactions around, can we pull the extra out? Can we do all these types of things? So in my mind, it was a culmination of both of those, conversations kind of coming to fruition, going, you know what? All right, fine. Mining isn't good. The mining aspect is causing pain. It's causing issues to the network. It's reducing the usability of the network from that standpoint. And I guess you could say the safety as well. But there was also this opportunity to say, hey, look, we're going to do things differently. We've learned a lot over the last 3 years. And part of that is how we can restructure those transactions and change how those hashes are constructed for those transactions so we can prune data. And again, all of this is only possible because of the proof of stake aspect that we're bringing into play here.
From a most basic level, what are the most basic pieces that we need to absolutely be hashed? Obviously, we need the hash of the block before. We're going to need the signatures or the transactions, or I guess key images, right?
So yeah, let's start with the transactions themselves, right? Because the block before is going to fall into the block hash, but let's focus on the transactions for a second. At its core, we only need a couple of different pieces there. We need some type of a version identifier, because obviously we don't want to lock ourselves into not being able to upgrade things or change things in the future. And then to your point, we need the key images. The key images are imperative. Those have to be there. And, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what key images are for there, Ruck.
So a key image is what helps us determine if funds have been spent on chain or not. So in a private blockchain, it's pretty difficult for us to just take a look at a single, input hash and then trace that across the network as it moves, because every time it moves, it's getting burned and resurrected as new currency. And so you end up getting this constant shuffling of the hashes as it moves along. So key images are a way for us to determine that this randomized input, or this, I guess you should say, like this private input has not been encountered before as spent on the network.
Absolutely true and very well said. So we definitely need those as part of the transactions, to make sure that people aren't doing double spends. And then on the output side, when we're taking a look at the transaction outputs, there's just a couple of key pieces of information that we need there as well. We need the output key, so in essence, the one-time destination address. We need an amount, and in our case, in V2, it's going to be a masked amount, hidden in masks, so we only the receiver can see what that amount looks like. And then there's a commitment to that amount that is kind of tied on there, and that commitment is the proof that masked amount falls within the certain range. And of course, that range being from 0 to the maximum value of a 64-bit number, to keep that real simple. So the outputs, are rather minimal, and generally speaking, because of having that amount masking, most transactions are only going to have, two outputs, one or two outputs, really. I mean, one going to where the funds are destined to, and then one for change, versus what we see today of, anywhere from 10 to 15 different outputs, because we need the pretty denominations.
Would you say that that's a description of Peterson commitments and range proofs?
Absolutely, to a certain extent. I think we briefly touched on it before, but those Peterson commitments are special, to put it bluntly, right? right? It is a mathematical formula that does allow you to use some properties of some homomorphic encryption because it is additive. So when you create that commitment, you're basically bundling up the amount with a random factor, so to speak, into a lockbox that only the receiver can kind of unlock and verify that that's what that amount is. But the network sees that proof and ties it over to the bulletproof verification stuff that we've got into play here to validate that amount is within the range that it needs to be. So again, when we actually look at the core structure of the transaction, like I said, we've got that version information, a little couple of pieces there. I mean, we can throw on things like unlock times, and then the inputs being the key images, the outputs being the output keys, the commitments, and the masked amounts, right? And there are a couple of other small pieces of information that has to be there for the protocol to work. One of those being the transaction public key, and that is a random key, or I should say it's generated from a random private key that is per transaction. It's basically a throwaway key, and that's what enables us to use stealth addresses and being able to unmask the amount and basically identify that those funds are destined for me, if you were sending to me. So that's a piece of required information there. It's still relatively small, right? And, on a normal transaction, we can even still give them a little bit of extra space, right? Not tons, but it's good to be able to leave something there in case somebody wants to run a layer 2 solution on top of it or alongside of TurtleCoin, right? As a
That's
place
an interesting
to link
idea.
back to the as a way to link back to the chain.
These layer 2 solutions must be some smart guys that deal with these things.
Oh, totally. I like where you're going with that, but let's circle around to that a little bit later here. But yeah, so anyways, at its core, that's all that we need for a transaction, for funds to move. And you may have noticed I didn't say the signatures and the range proofs. Those are not required, for money to move between recipients. I mean, if I'm the receiver, I don't care whether or not the signature was valid. I just want to get my funds, and from that same aspect, I don't care whether or not it's within the range, for the range proofs. What does care about that information is the network itself, right? So the producers and the validators care about those signatures and those range proofs. And why that is important is because the producers, of course, have to produce blocks with transactions that are valid.
That makes sense.
So what we're doing, and why we're able to kind of do this is that we can trim off those bulletproof proofs. We can trim off the ring signatures, no matter what ones we use, as soon as we commit it to the chain, because the producer is validating and verifying the signatures. It's validating and verifying the proofs. And then, of course, they create the block. The validator's job then is to what? It's to validate that what the producer did was correct. So they're also going to validate the signatures. They're going to validate those proofs, and they're going to sign off on the block, right? So at that point, we've handed over that trust, from the miners, as we have today in V1 and the pools and all that sort of stuff, over to the producers and validators. Once they've done their job and the validators have signed off on the block, we've basically guaranteed that transactional data was correct when the transaction was submitted. Am I making sense so far?
Yeah, let me break that down for people that aren't really putting 2 and 2 together. This means that instead of waiting like 120 blocks or whatever for your TurtleCoin transaction to be approved, on various services or whatever, things are going to be relatively near instant. As far as once it hits the pool and gets validated, that's basically the stamp of approval that it's going to be included in a block. Am I correct on that?
That's true. I mean, you can certainly do that, and that would be an option. I won't get into the point that there's probably still a certain level of risk to accepting it immediately as a service, but you could certainly drop it down from the 120 blocks today that a lot of services run down to, 1 or 2 just to be on the safe side. And that's still going to be pretty damn fast, and there's probably a pretty reasonable assumption there, as you said, that as soon as it's in a block, it's committed.
Well, the reason why we can't really just say, with certainty X amount of block, because blocks don't really have like a definite time now, do they?
Correct. That is the flip side, and I'll circle back to that here in just a quick second, because I do want to finish my thought on the pruning side of things. So
go ahead.
Nope, you're fine. You're fine. That's an awesome topic to talk about a little bit as well. But on the pruning side of things, once they've done that and they've validated it and it's committed to the chain chain, so to speak. We don't need those signatures. We don't need those proofs anymore. The fact that they validated it and that they produced it and the network did its job is the proof, because again, the validators and the producers have to sign off on the block. And I'm saying a literal digital signature to sign off on this information. So they are testing, in a non-revocable way that what was there was valid at the time that it was processed, right? So that's the important thing. So we can lop off the signatures. We can lop off the bullet proofs, right? All that no longer needs to be stored in chain. That is going to save us a crap ton of space. Like I said before, in V1, believe it or not, most of the space that's taken up by transactions is the signatures. And I can kind of showcase that from the standpoint that, me running the block API, the blockchain cache, that is sitting behind TurtlePay that powers things like our Explorer. I don't store signatures in there today. That's not something that's useful to the majority of users. So it's actually not cached in the system today. And my database for that is still hovering. I think last time I looked, it's like 38 gigabytes. And that's with relational indexes built in there, tons of them, versus the 160 gigs plus that we see with a node on disk.
Didn't we do the math one day and look at if we had all the V2 tech built into V1, wouldn't that mean that the blockchain would be something around like 8 gigabytes right now?
It's entirely possible. I mean, by the time that we would start pulling out all the extra junk that people stuffed in over the years that wouldn't be there because of the limits, trimming off the signatures and all that kind of good stuff and reorganizing the transactions, that's probably pretty accurate, to say that we'd be at, I'll call it 8 to 10 gigs to be on the safe side, possibly even smaller today if we had that same technology in place.
That's just ridiculous.
Is it that's ridiculous, or is it the fact that we waited this long to go down this road, the ridiculous part?
Well, I'm kind of glad that we did something, because doing the same shit over and over and over would have gotten old after a while. And I think our user base, though a small minority cried about the different things that they didn't like about it, I think as a whole, people just want a usable network.
I agree with that sentiment 100%, and that's a lot of what drives us, is that we're trying to reduce the barriers of entry to the network, and part of that barrier today is that if you want to run your own node, you got to wait for it to sync. It's going to download 160 gigs of data, from other nodes on the network. Whether you're using checkpoints or not, it's still 160 gigs that's going to be churned through. And that problem is only going to get worse with more time. By making the changes as we will for V2, that stuff, it's a lot easier that in 3 to 5 years worth of use that you get to download 5, 6, 7 gigs instead of 160. And it just means that the nodes sync a lot faster.
I'm trying to think of what are some networks right now that have really big blockchains. Ethereum would be one.
I gotta be dead honest. The only other nodes that I run anymore, besides my Turtle nodes, of course, are a couple of BTC nodes, and I don't dare look at how big those are either. But
you can get those down pretty small too now.
Yeah, but man, I want the full history there. I'm doing some experiments.
Oh, I hear you.
I'm doing some experiments. I need the full stuff there, and I don't even look at how big those are. So I don't even know how big some of these chains get. But I can only imagine that there are chains that are bigger than ours on disk.
IBM CD glows in the dark. You heard it here first, folks. You heard it here first, folks.
What? Glows in the dark? What do you mean by that?
I'm just noting your stylistic flair.
Stylistic flair. All right. I'll take it. I wanted to circle back to that other point that you made, and man, I forgot what it was already.
About the near instant transactions?
Yeah, the near instant transactions. Still, that's not jogging my memory either, because that feels like that was just before that.
I think I was talking about layer 2 solutions.
Layer 2 solutions. Yeah, but tell us a little bit about that layer 2 solution thing that you were talking about. Maybe it'll jog my memory.
I mean, I doubt it's this right here, but whenever we were talking about layer 2 solutions, I was referencing Karai, which is a popular, well, actually not so much known, but popular to me, layer 2 solution that not a lot of folks may remember. Karai was like like originally a plan to build smart contracts, private smart contracts on Turtle. Originally, we were going to do a side chain with its own currency, and it was going to be a singular side chain, and everybody would deploy their apps to it. And that never took off. I don't think we ever did anything with that. But it became evident that there was not really an actual demand for smart contracts. It was more what we were hearing was other people have smart contract. We're a privacy network. It would be cool if we had privacy smart contracts. We need that, and it became like this, hey, this is what's hot right now. We need to have this. And people are doing it right now with like NFTs and that type of stuff. So I guess down the road, we ended up coming up with the idea. I think it was me, you, Fexra, and a couple of other people that were having a conversation. And we were talking about what if we had like a bunch of different side chains, and what if there was no central Kurai network? What if there was no currency? And what we ended up coming up with was a coordinated directed acyclic graph, which is basically like a blockchain where there's a bunch of transactions and they move forward, except they can be interlinked in interesting ways. And currently the way that Kurai works is that each user on the network, they can be any network, but each user on the network, each public key, I should say, has its own little blockchain that's connected to the other blockchain. And so you might notice that as something that's familiar from networks like Nano. And it enables you to basically put a link in the TurtleCoin blockchain that has a pointer in it that you can decode, and it links you to the Kurai network where you can make all types of transactions. It doesn't have to wait for blocks. There's no block times, and it's just really fast. You can, like, let's say you had like a video game or something like that, and let's say you wanted to put every single user movement or user action into the blockchain. But obviously, if you did that on TurtleCoin, just in the minimum fees alone, that would eat you alive.
I'm all for it. Somebody should do it. Let's go.
I'm cool with that. As a person who mines, I am totally fine with that.
You do.
I will mine those transactions. Well, this is a way to, let's say, offload all that transactional input to a ephemeral side network that you can still cryptographically attest that these actions were recorded and everything was done in a fair way. And the downside to it is that it's somewhat centralized because you still have a coordinator node, just like in IOTA. And the coordinator node's purpose is to timestamp everything accurately. By timestamping things, you're attesting that one thing happened before the other. You're only putting one thing on the network at a time because it's measuring in nanoseconds. So the odds that they're going to be placed onto the network at the same time is very, very small. And whenever, like, let's say you have the user going to cash out their coins or whatever, and you want to settle the balance on the TurtleCoin blockchain, it can then notarize its state with a hash on the TurtleCoin blockchain, and at that point re-enter the TurtleCoin ecosystem to settle the payment. So you could have, a single pointer on the TurtleCoin chain that might cost you like 5 turtle or something like that. And then you could have like millions and millions and millions of transactions on the Kurai network, and then, down the road settle the transaction or the state or whatever on the TurtleCoin blockchain, and that'll have like another fee of like just a few turtle. And so all in all, you could have all of this data and have it still cryptographically linked and verifiable and be able to do whatever you like with it. And so I've used it as a back end for a lot of different things. There's even a library, like a client library, to integrate it into your own apps. And anyway, so I'm working on V2 for that right now. And one of the concepts that I'm working on is making it P2P. So there's no more centralization. And hopefully it'll make some of these side graphs like a little bit more sticky in the sense that right now there's not, I don't know if there's really any people out there using Kurai or doing anything interesting with it. All I do right now is track a bunch of SpaceX satellite data and launch data and rocket data and track that in there. But other than that, I don't think anybody else is really doing anything with it. And I think it's because I haven't really given it much utility. So I've been toying with ideas and ways of using multisig and TurtleCoin to kind of create ERC20-like assets on Kurai. Then I think people would probably enjoy that. People are pretty NFT crazy right now, and that's something that I actually built as a proof concept a while back. And so I was thinking about kind of elaborating on that and just kind of diverting the shit funnel away from TurtleCoin and just pump it into Kurai and let people make their own little networks with that. But in the meantime, lock up a bunch of TurtleCoin to do it. So hopefully it will gain a little bit of usage, and divert the shit funnel somewhere else.
Makes sense, and it's still a good idea, in my mind to develop that layer 2 solution, because as we've talked about before, Turtle should do what Turtle does, right? And that's be a network for performing transaction. And, leaving those pointer spaces, that extra data behind is going to be imperative for people such as yourself that want to build, layer 2 solutions, other type of solutions, while leveraging that existing network. So there is still some utility there, right? That we definitely don't want to nix. And it's great to see that you're giving some thought on how that can play out in 2. And
well, it's definitely prohibitive right now. If you wanted to do an app or something like that and settle it on the TurtleCoin chain, you're going to have to basically launch as a paid app. You don't have much chance to just, try something out. And I guess it's the same as on Ethereum, where you still have to pay gas fees to get your contract up there. But at a certain point, it's a barrier to entry. And with Karai, it's basically, you have some spare computers that you can run it on. Do the people in your network want to, help in some of the work?
I like it. Makes a lot of sense. And it's definitely going to remove one of those barriers to entry, right?
Yep. But anyway, I didn't mean to sidetrack the convo.
Nope, you're fine. Because while you were talking there, I heard you say the key phrase. It reminded me of what I had gotten already. So you mentioned no block times. That's kind of where we kind of diverted a little bit when I was going on the transaction thing with the pruning, is that the whole concept of the pruning really plays out in a couple of different ways. Not to circle back too hard here, because this is important to make sure that blocks travel around very quickly. The smaller the blocks are, the smaller the transactions are, the smaller the blocks are, the faster the blocks actually move between nodes, across the widest expanse of the planet, right? The speed of light is only so fast, and
propagation.
Network latency can play a major role here in the way that we're doing things. And to kind of reiterate a point there, the way that we're doing things is that there are no more block times in V2, right?
Yep.
And we're getting rid of block times because it's crazy to create blocks that are empty. I think we've mentioned that before as well. So it's imperative that, like I said, we make it sure that everything is as small as possible so it moves as fast as possible. So while we've seen and we've talked about other networks that have tried to spin faster than 30-second blocks, how, at a certain point, things start to fly apart, largely because the blocks and the transactions aren't moving quick enough between all the nodes. This is going to be important, this pruning process, because the pruning, like I said, it's going to greatly reduce the size of the transactions and ultimately the blocks. And the amount of transactions, or the amount of transactional power that needs to take place is going to be what's going to power that movement or the creation of the blocks on the blockchain. So we don't know exactly how quickly, blocks are going to come out in V2. I mean, there could be one every hour. There could be one every 5 seconds. There could be one a week apart, right? We don't know. And so that kind of spins back around to that whole idea of the confirmation. Generally speaking, there's a pretty good chance that once a transaction is contained within a block, that's committed. You can trust that block's not going to change. Like
I think the way that people
go ahead.
I think the way people are going to measure it is going to be in POW time. How much POW is put on top of this since.
Very, very, very probable, in all honesty. And like we hinted at, I think in a couple of different articles, maybe even one of the prior podcasts, the chances of a reorganization do not totally disappear, where a block could be overwritten, so to speak, at a specific height during that reorganization event. The chances of it still technically exist, but it's so minuscule for the fact to think about that if there's 200 validators on the network, and there probably won't ever be that many per se in a given round, to say that a majority of them have to sign off on that block's not going anywhere. It is what it is.
Yeah, unless that one validator wants to roast their funds.
Well, even if one out of 200 is not going to sway the decision of the entire group,
True.
I mean, that's the benefit of making it a majority-based system with the proof of stake and the whole delegation process. That's important from that standpoint. Not only are the block creations delegated out to the network and those who stake their nodes and the people that stake those nodes, those validators are backed as well. And you bring up an interesting point. What happens when they do perform poorly? What happens when they do fake a validation, or hell, they just sign off on the block because, man, they wanted to get it in and out the door as fast fast as possible, but there was something bad in it. I mean, what happens then?
I don't know, man. It makes me nervous to think about it, to be honest.
That doesn't make me nervous because I know exactly what we're going to do. We're going to go slashing their funds.
Yeah, but I mean, imagine the first guy that's going to come into chat, and it's inevitable that there's going to be some type of debacle where somebody who's known to the community as a good guy or whatever is going to genuinely have their shit fucked up and misconfigured. And the way that people operate today is that they can do no wrong, and even if they made a mistake, they want to be made whole. There's lots of participation trophies going around these days, and people are going to be expecting to be paid still even whenever they fuck up. So I can only imagine what members of the community we have right now that we think are cool but are going to turn into real assholes whenever they roast their own funds and try to come to us with their hands on their hips about it, like we can help them out. Just reach deep into the chain because we're the devs supposedly of a decentralized chain and just bring their funds back to life. I don't think people understand that this is an automated system. It's not like we can log in like PayPal.
While you were saying that, I had a little laugh to myself because I thought, hey, look, if they come in looking for refunds, so to speak, we can just send them a vexer, right?
Yeah. Is he awake?
All kidding aside, for everybody listening, don't go to Fexra asking for refunds. That's probably one of those inside jokes, right?
Yeah.
But to that point, the only thing that we really can do to help curb some of that behavior and help people to understand what it means to stake and what you have at risk there is to make it abundantly clear in the wallets that, hey, look, by putting up this stake, this could happen, but this could also happen, right?
All right. Well, look, let's just jump into it real quick from a 5,000 foot view. What does staking entail? What does validating entail? What does producing entail? Meaning, what type of hardware do I need? Is my investment small, medium, or large? You don't have to go into specific numbers. And
fair enough.
What are the potential pitfalls in each of those? So
I can kind of dive into that from the 5,000 foot view, right? So from the standpoint of, running a node that is part of the network, may not necessarily be involved in the consensus. We see that as some software that very likely will run on practically any device. Because again, not every node needs to validate the bulletproofs, needs to validate the signatures, et cetera, right? So they don't necessarily need to perform all that work because ultimately at the end of the day, they're following the producers and the validators. So to be a candidate node, that is going to try for one of those elected producer and validator spots, you probably should have a little bit beefier hardware than a Raspberry Pi. I mean, I'll be dead honest here. I mean, because you're going to have to validate the signatures, you're going to have to validate the bulletproofs, and you're going to have to do it quickly because, again, we don't know how fast the blocks are going to move. So that means, solid state drives, a multi-core processor, something relatively new. And when I say relatively, probably within the last 4 or 5 years, a pretty decent amount of memory, because the more memory that you can have, the more data that can remain in memory, and it doesn't have to go constantly back to disk. But probably the most important thing that you'll need to be a candidate node and have the possibility of getting elected is a rock solid or stable internet connection. Because if you lose connection to the network, you're gonna fall behind. You're going to miss your turn if you get elected, right?
Yep.
Internet connectivity is going to be probably the biggest thing that people need to think about.
Already I can probably imagine the people that are going to be trying to be a validator on a Raspberry Pi that's on Wi-Fi to the next dorm room over.
Entirely possible, right? And that's going to be part of it, is kind of helping to understand that. And the way that I've got it in my mind that we're going to set it up and do this is that you'll be able to run, multiple nodes with the same keys, so that way, if you do have an outage on a particular device somewhere, you do have the opportunity to kind of cover your own ass by running multiple copies with those same keys, and they kind of all orchestrate or all broadcast together. And that's okay because they're all using the same keys. Everything kind of looks the same. But to your point, somebody's going to try something. Somebody's going to try something stupid, right? When it comes down to it, they're going to use 4G or 3G internet connections and they're going to drop out and they're going to get...
Guys, I compiled it in BusyBox.
Yeah, exactly. All that kind of fun stuff. So while we're trying to make the requirements for operating relatively low and providing some safety net there, users ultimately have to be responsible for running these highly available services. And part of the way that we're going to try to help people understand the severity and the resource requirements that are required to do so is to be a candidate for a producer or validator spot. You're going to have to stake yourself. You're going to have to put up a considerable amount of funds. We still haven't thrown a number on there, but it's, like we've talked about before, it's going to be significant to a point. It's not going to be something that you can throw, I hate to bring the price discussion into it. You're not going to be able to throw $10 in TurtleCoin at it and then run a candidate. That's just not feasible for somebody to understand what it takes to operate a validator or producer if all that they're willing to throw into the resources required to do so is $10. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. But what's going on in my mind right now is I'm trying to think of, if I were Joe P. Hader out there on the internet, what would I be saying right now?
Well, he should be saying to himself, well, it costs 32 ETH to stake in ETH2, right?
Oh, yeah.
Think about it that way. Everybody has an entrance requirement to be able to stake. And we're kind of taking a double form view of this, and I don't necessarily mean to compare us to ETH, right? But they're pretty much an all in or nothing. You got to come up with a 32 ETH to be able to stake at all. Otherwise, you join one of the staking pools, which from what I've seen, they're largely operated by exchanges. And, me personally, I'm not a big fan of keeping my money on exchanges, regardless of how trustworthy I may feel that they are.
What do you mean? What could go wrong?
Not your keys, not your funds, damn it.
There's got to be a way to discourage that.
Yeah, you'd think so. Maybe the exchanges will teach them a lesson at some point, but they'd be shooting their own customers, so I doubt it. But anyways, so there's that aspect, and that candidacy fee, I guess you could say in ETH, the 32 ETH, looking at the current value of ETH, that's a significant investment. Now, I'm not saying that we need to take it to that level because we've got a couple of different facets here. When you're staking yourself, let's say that we set it at 1,000 V2 Turtle, just as an example. That may sound like a lot, and in all honesty, it probably is. But if you've got 1,000 V2 Turtle, man, you have probably been mining and digging and putting effort into V1 for the last 3+ years. And like I said,
what's that, a billion turtle?
As an example. What's that?
What's that, like a billion turtle?
I can't do the math right now. Yeah, probably, which is a lot, and I'm, like I said, I was just using that as an example. I'm not saying that everybody's going to have $1 billion or billion turtle to.
That's like $500, man.
Is it?
Who has that kind of money?
$500?
Yeah, for like a billion V1 turtle.
I'm sure there are probably a couple of people. We're sissing when you need them. But anyway, so that whole process, like I said, is you becoming a candidate, and that doesn't even necessarily mean that you'll get a spot as a producer and a validator, but you've put up your funds. You're saying, I am perfectly capable of running highly available services. I'm putting my money where my mouth is, so to speak, and I'm willing to put that on the line just to say that I am qualified to do this. However, to get one of those producers or validator spots in each one of the election rounds, other people have to believe in you as well, and they have to stake their turtle against your candidacy, for lack of better words, for you to be elected. And they're going to put their turtle at risk by backing you. So it's not just a keep throwing funds at people. You're going to have to watch and see which validators which candidates do you believe, I guess makes the most sense, do you believe are going to remain online? They're going to keep their services up and available. They're going to do their job. And are they trustworthy, right? And we can provide some metrics about this, like how many blocks they've previously validated successfully, how many blocks they've previously produced successfully. But there's always going to be a chance that things could go sideways. And I'm following you 100% here that somebody's going to come in with their hands on their hips at some point. That's how serious this is, though. When you think about it, it's a financial network, guys. We are literally moving people's funds around. It is very serious. And as much as we joke and we kid, we're trying to build a network that enables those financial transactions. transaction. We want people to use TurtleCoin, and the only way that we can do that and make sure that it gets the attention that it requires to operate the network and be part of that is to make sure that people have skin in the game. And when they have those stakes in place, either via their candidacy or users voting, in essence, for those candidates, there's got to be a repercussion, a penalty, just some kind of a action that occurs when they choose poorly.
So where does the money go whenever somebody messes up? I'm assuming it just gets shot out into space into a randomly generated address, right?
It doesn't get shot randomly out into space into a randomly generated address. It just no longer exists. So imagine that when we shoot it out into space, to steal your phrase, it goes directly into a black hole. And the reason that I say this is, I think I briefly mentioned it on one of the previous podcast episodes, is that when you stake, you are technically burning those coins, and you are getting an IOU back that says that you can come and you can recall those coins at some point in the future. So those coins do not exist in the normal sense when you stake, whether you're staking your candidate node or you're staking another node, because you believe that they're going to do the right job. You're burning those coins. They no longer exist. When you make a poor decision, or the candidate node makes a poor decision, or doesn't do their job because they're not online, or they're running code that is just signing off on blocks, whatever it may be, and they get caught, that IOU is what's going to get slashed. Instead of the network saying, let's say I sent in that 1,000 coins, right? And me having an IOU for 1,000 coins, the network's going to take that IOU and it's going to slash it. It may not be as drastic as saying, hey, look, yoink, 50% of those coins you'll never get back, and your IOU is only worth 500 coins at this point, but it's going to be slashed, and we haven't quite determined what that percentage is going to be, but your IOU amount is just going to decrease,
burn it all.
The money won't be, it's burned at that point. It doesn't exist. So when you do go to redeem that IOU, you're going to get back, 5,000 in that example instead of 1,000, and those other 500 just no longer a part of the network. They just disappeared. Maybe you should have done your job. Maybe you should have kept the machine online. Sorry.
I wonder what kind of services are going to pop up. Maybe, I guess, as a function of our block explorers, but I wonder what kind of services are going to pop up that have listings and stats and reputations and things like that about the different producers and validators and such, or I guess staking pools and things.
Well, the aspect of the data that will be available, some of the stuff that I've roughed out on sheets of paper so far, because I'm still kind of working through some of the API stuff, will provide some information directly out of the daemon about producers and validators and candidates on the network. I mean, just general stuff. Like I said, how many blocks they've been assigned to produce, that they did produce, how many blocks they validated, XYZ. We'll be able to pull those stats out of there, and from that, you could build that stuff directly into the Explorer. You could build some ancillary tools on there. The staking pools idea, and we may have touched on this before, I don't know. It's hard to kind of remember all this stuff all the time, but the staking pools, I'll say there's a possibility there for somebody.
I think it's guaranteed.
Well, it probably is guaranteed, and I'll give them a pro tip up front. If you're going to go that route and you're going to build that, be careful, because again, we've talked about this before. The candidates that have the most votes and the candidates that have the least votes get trimmed out of the election process. So if you were going to do a staking pool, you'd actually have to kind of split it across a couple of different nodes. Otherwise, you risk blowing yourself up, if that makes sense.
Ain't going to be no hero miners here.
No hero miners here. I mean,
no hero stakers neither.
No hero stakers. I like it. Hero stakers. I think we call that Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah.
No, not funny. I thought.
Yeah, I had UPN.
Okay, fair enough. But yeah, so that's going to be interesting, because like I said before, a POS or staking pool possibility exists. Just like I talked about before, the possibility for a secondary transaction POW mining pool technically exists, that somebody could pull that together and pull that off. All those avenues are there, but it's going to be a challenge kind of educating the masses that, hey, look, this again is serious this business. When you stake, it's not only upward potential. You do get rewarded, but you get rewarded for doing your job and keeping your node online and producing and validating blocks. When you don't do that, it's not like mining now. Like mining now, when you mine, great. You mine to a pool, you get your rewards. Your 50 turtle comes out every 5 minutes from hero miners. It's great. When you stop mining, there is no penalty, right? Your coins don't disappear today. If you are a candidate node and you get elected and you do not do your job, there is a penalty. So if you shut off your stuff, you will be penalized unless you withdraw your candidacy. And that's going to be the important thing, is that people have to have an active role in this. And like I said, that skin in the game, while they're part of, for lack of better words, managing the transactional process of everybody's funds. It is serious. I don't want to call it deathly serious, but it is very serious, and people need to take it seriously. So the whole idea of a fly by night, like I'm going to stake this, and then I'm going to stake this, and then I'm going to pull it out, I'm going to go over here, and I give up. Well, if you give up, the network's probably going to be eating your coins unless you're smart about it.
In a way, I kind of like that, because I think it kind of forces the network to be no bullshit. It's a very low potential for abuse, though we're probably going to see a lot of people attempt it. I don't think that it'll be very successful, and I think only those that are most interested in the sanctity of the network and the sanctity of the transaction and the surety of the flow of transactions, I think only those people will be the ones that are running the services. And in a way, I think that they deserve to be rewarded, because you look at V2, and with the usage-based emission, things get a little bit more scarce. And so it definitely, it's going to help out. It's going to help those people be adequately compensated for their efforts.
Absolutely. And that's the important thing. I mean, we've always been big on the aspect of being fair to, the miners, and, being as fair as possible to the pool operators, and fostering this awesome network where it's easy to transact. And ultimately, at the end of the day, kind of like you said, you've got to take it serious. You've got, and as long as you're taking it serious, as many users have, you'll get rewarded. Give it its justice. We're doing all of these things, making transactions smaller, making blocks smaller, making things faster, doing the delegated proof of stake. We're putting all this effort in because not only do we want to, but it's the aspect that this is, in our mind, how we help take care of the community, I guess you could say. They've put up with a lot of crap over the last 3 years. Let's let them reap some rewards, while at the same time ensuring that the network actually has a sustainable future that isn't going to eat up a 10 terabyte disk by the end of 2025.
Makes me think of like Chia Network and that type of stuff.
I've seen some of that in the news, but I honestly, God, have not followed it, because every time I hear Chia, I think of Chia Pet, and I think that those two aren't related.
Man, I miss my Chia Obama head.
You had one of those? Was it from was it from the As Seen on TV store at the mall?
No, it came with a place that I moved into.
Really? That's what they left behind.
Yep.
Nice. So while I'm thinking about it, we got a quick little, I won't call it a lull, but a quick little pause here. Pick a number from 1 to 25, Rock.
3.
3. He picks the number 3. So for those of you that listened to the last episode, we've got a prize going on here, a contest that when you're listening to the podcast, you'll be listening for the 25 mnemonic words that go into a phrase that you can then use to restore a turtle wallet. And inside you will find at least 1 million turtle. And Rock just picked number 3. And the word for number 3 is lush. It's L-U-S. Lush.
How do you spell that?
L as in lion, U as in unicorn, S as in Sam, H as in
There you go.
Lush.
Maybe a little too much, but yeah, lush.
Sounds good. I wonder if anybody's guessed it yet.
With just 2 words down, it would be a hell of a challenge. Don't get me wrong, you probably pull it off, but considering that I haven't even given out what the public address is, you wouldn't know if you found it or not.
True. Somebody at the NSA is like, Don't
worry, I got this. Little warning to the guys at the NSA, our mnemonic phrases are 25 words because it stores all 256 bits of the seed, unlike some other blockchains out there where they only actually store 128 bits of the seed, and everything's kind of derived from that. So you're going to have to work quite a bit harder to find the right combination.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just had this image of I forget what cartoon it was, one of the adult cartoons where the guy keeps walking up behind the guy going, yeah. He's like talking shit or something like that. And you know what I'm talking about, that whole lot. There's always some groupie in the background doing it.
So what else we got on the agenda? I'm trying to think of what the third topic was.
I'm taking a quick look at a little bit about block validation and transaction validation, which we kind of touched on and kind of dove into actually quite a bit there. But that all comes down to validating those signatures and those proofs. We talked about the pruning a bit.
What questions do we have in the subreddit?
It's been a while since I looked, and I think I actually unpinned the one topic from a couple of weeks ago, largely because there wasn't a whole lot else dropping in there other than people asking when moon.
Oh, here's one right here.
What you got?
He says, on V2 listings and trading by Repulsive Stretch 43, totally a real name. Turtle V2 will launch in roughly 4 months. After the launch, there will be 2 Turtle chains, and the exchanges will have to decide if they list V2 or not. I hypothesize that a lot of people would convert their V1 coins on day one, causing the circulating number of V1 coins drop, possibly having a positive effect on price. But if the exchanges don't list V2 immediately, then the converted V2 coins will be practically locked for trading. I would like to hear from the community. For example, would you convert your V1 coins to V2 before an exchange starts supporting V2? It's an interesting hypothesis, and that's something I hadn't really considered.
What do you mean you didn't consider it? That the supply would be slowly dropping, I guess you could say, as people trade them in, and there will undoubtedly be some amount of overlap time between the services using 1 and 2?
Yeah, and how people may trade V1 against V2 and vice versa.
More power to them. I mean, I already turned in all my V1 coins for V2.
Kind of makes me wonder, like, if the price went up on V1 enough, would that increase the chances of somebody trying to reignite the chain after the chain has been burned?
That would be funny. I'll admit it. I would laugh because, like we talked about before, I mean, you can certainly try to pull it off and keep things kind of going, but we get a lot of people turning in V1 funds. Man, that's a lot of supply gone, which hey, could be a good thing if that's what you're about, but there's a risk. I mean, even if they tried to fork the chain now, right, and try to run off with it, you still got a whole lot of people walking around with 108 billion or whatever the number is turtle that you'd have to contend with.
Golly, that's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't sound like a lot next to a trillion, but man, they'll be coming for it. I mean, if I've noticed anything about the chat over the last 2-3 months, it's that they're gonna get theirs.
Yeah, yeah, it's an interesting thing. I'm not even sure if I have like an official answer on the question that the guy's asking, other than it's an interesting question. I appreciate that he asked about it and that he was or that they were, I guess, polite about the price part of it.
Oh, for sure. I think I saw that the other day, and I hadn't actually commented on it or anything like that yet, because it is interesting to think about, but it's a mechanic that I don't know that we could ever account for. I mean, that's one of those things that, at least from my mind, I'm holding on tight to my seat to see what happened. Not from the anxiety standpoint, but I just don't know. It could go either way, and the concept of trading V1 against V2, that could be interesting as well. I'm sure somebody will do it, and maybe they'll have to come onto a podcast at one point and tell us how they what went through their head to make them want to do that, aside from whatever possible price play may come into play.
I'm sure it's probably somebody trying to identify arbitrage opportunities.
I'm told that those are the best kind, but I don't know anything about that.
Here's a guy with a follow-up to that one. He said, good question. I hadn't really thought about it until now. If people start converting their turtle to V2, will that push the price of remaining V1 up through scarcity? Will the temptation to try and make a quick buck cost me the V1 I've been working for so that I have a moderate balance when V2 comes along? I think there are other places I could make money. I do want to mine as much V1 as I can. At the same time, I'm here foremost because I'm invested in the Turtle project and I believe in its potential. I believe we're feeding a big child that no one's figured out as a baby giant yet. I'm converting ASAP, depending on how that affects my ability to mine V1, how worthwhile mining V1 is as it gets less worth doing. Interesting take on that. That was Nobu Okojima.
Oh yeah, he's been on that. I've seen him pop into a couple of threads on Reddit over the last couple of months. That's one of the things. I mean, me for one, I can only speak for myself, but I will swap all of my stuff over very quick.
Me too. I don't even want to be part of whatever happens on V1 after.
Exactly. Don't get me wrong. There may come a point, depending on how things play out, that I'll put my head down on my desk and go, dude, You did it again. But all in all, I'm stoked for V2. You know, that's where my mind's going to be at.
I'm so ready.
I was ready last year.
Yep. Man, I remember the day that I first, kind of sat everybody down and was like, guys, what if we do something really crazy? Start the chain over.
Well, in all honesty, I think you mentioned a couple of times, and the first couple of times that we kind of talked about it, it was along the lines of, yeah, but dude, we can't just do it automatically. We can't just bring all these key images and stuff like that over. It doesn't work like that. And having to have the full history there. And I think I even spent some time digging into, was it possible to translate some of that information into the database in such a way that it would make sense? And ultimately, I kind of came back and said, oh, hell no, that ain't never going to work. It's going to take a swap. And I think you said, yeah, okay, yeah, that probably makes sense. But we couldn't necessarily just come along and go, hey, look, here's V1, here's V1.5, swap your coins over, without any substantial changes. So as the conversation started to change on, the proof of stake discussion, as I started attacking, the bulletproofs aspect of things and the ring confidential transactions and all that kind of stuff, that really gave us the additional kick that was needed to say, hey, look, relaunching now is the right thing to do, and a swap makes sense at this point. Does that sound about right?
Yep. And while we're at the drawing board, let's strike while the iron's hot and try some other, revolutionary things that nobody else is doing.
Well, it's not that we know of anyways. It's hard to follow all the projects, but yeah, it's definitely a cool time. How long was the bounty up in the bounties channel for implementing bulletproofs? I mean, hell, I think it was up there for 2.5 years until I finally unpinned it.
Yep.
And then like 3 months later, I'm like, fuck it, I'm going for it. And I went and did the code. So shoot myself in the foot.
Yep.
But it is what it is. And in all honesty, I don't even know that I would have chased after the bulletproof stuff if it wasn't for the fact that we kept getting hit in the face with miners doing what miners do, and that's getting theirs. Miners
inherently, they're profit motivated.
Yep, and I think that's at least drove me to start the conversations a little bit differently and approach it with the standpoint that maybe Rock's not wrong.
Imagine that.
Took a while to get there, but there you have it. I'm not going to tell you that you're right. I'm just going to tell you that you're not wrong.
Just once a year. That's all I need.
You don't want to burn it up already in June.
Yeah. I'm excited for V2, but I'm even more excited for what V3 may lay ahead. I doubt that another chain swap will be needed, but I'm interested in seeing where this goes for V3.
I was actually doing some reading over the last week, and I don't want to totally tie up some time here, thinking about what could be ahead of us in the future, because God knows, maybe we're not even part of it. But I was doing some research on the quantum resistant cryptography stuff the last year, and I came across a handful of cryptocurrency related papers as it comes to the quantum proof crypto. And it's interesting. I mean, nobody has a good answer yet, but there are a number of different teams that are thinking about it. So like I mentioned before, these teams have got to be thinking about this stuff. I'm glad to see that a couple of teams are. And the sad fact of the matter is that in some ways, I think it's almost inevitable that a lot of projects, and possibly even ourselves included, will have to relaunch and swap, because the keys and the cryptography used in anything post-quantum is so much different from ECC and EDSA and all those types of schemes that there's no good way to carry it across. I mean, one of the points in one of the papers that I read through was that just having a quantum system that is capable of breaking the crypto today, so to speak, the stuff that we're using today, puts everything in the past at risk as well. I mean, not just from a privacy standpoint, but everything can be unlocked. There's a couple different facets to it. Everything can be unlocked locked and the entire thing could be stomped over. You do not want to execute an upgrade to quantum resistant cryptography as an upgrade to the existing base and carry that history around, if that makes any sense.
Makes complete sense.
So it's sad to think about, from the aspect that, man, there's probably another swap coming sometime in the future, but it could be years out. It could be decades out.
How much of a kick in the nuts would it be if, like, immediately after launch of V2, we have to do it again for V3 for quantum?
Oh, Jesus. Man, I ain't got enough time to sort through the quantum crypto shit yet. Come on, give me a break. But it would be a huge kick in the nuts, but there are projects looking at it today, projects that, I'd have to dig the paper back up, but I never would have said, hey, look, guys, there's a pretty good chance that we're going to have to do a relaunch because we're going to have to do this from scratch. And it's going to be a massive change. I mean, so even from that aspect, the Goliath in the room, the BTC chain, right? In my mind, even they're going to have to relaunch at some point if they want to keep it safe.
I think they're probably going to be the first target if quantum ever comes out in any serious way or gets in any less scrupulous hand. I think BTC is going to be the first canary in the coal mine for that.
Well, yeah.
Given how weak the crypto is already.
This is very true. It's certainly, like I said, the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and I could certainly see it being the first target. It's scary to think about. But it's exciting at the same time because I'm glad that coming into this aspect that the changes or the research and the advancements happening in quantum technology right now is still happening within my lifetime. I just don't know that I want to deal with it, in all honesty, but that's me feeling old and tired, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely scary to think about, but it's kind of like a thrilling scary. Like first time going bungee jumping scary.
Have you done some bungee jumping, sir?
Maybe.
Closest I've ever brought myself to is that thing where they like stretch out and they spin you around and that, you know what I'm talking about, like end over end and sideways, whatever, like the gyroscopes or whatever.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Those things were in every single 90s sitcom ever, and you would have thought that we'd all be sitting in those every day for our fitness and that type of stuff, but it just never happened. That and VR.
Well, the VR I can buy into, but that spinning thing, I think the one time I got in one, I lasted an entire 60 seconds before I'm like, oh, nope, stop.
Didn't they have one of those in Lawnmower Man or Blank Check or something like that?
Maybe, yeah, something like that. I think definitely Lawnmower Man, if I remember correctly, but not to get too off topic.
So I remembered what the other topic was. We were going to talk about multisig and triptych.
Oh, yeah, that's right. So, bring you guys up to speed again in case you didn't listen to the previous episodes. We ran into a little hiccup with our plans with Arcturus and using that for both ring signatures and actually range proofs, because it actually combined the best of both worlds. In that, there was discovered a break in the dual discrete logarithm hardness assumption, such that Arcturus was no longer feasible for our purposes, meaning that it could be broken, which would bad or fake forward, which kind of led us back to the precursor to Arcturus, which was triptych. And that's another signing scheme, another signing structure or proof, so to speak, that grows the signature not in a linear scale, so it kind of has the same properties as Arcturus from the standpoint that the signatures are really small. The downside is that it does not contain the range proofs as well. So we actually would have to maintain the bulletproof signatures and the triptych signatures. Another downside of the triptych thing is that it is single index, which means that we have to have a triptych signature for each input, kind of like we do today, versus the Arcturus side where we could have combined multiple inputs into a single signature. So it looked like it was close enough that we could use it. However, as I was putting together the code and I got everything working and started structuring things up for the multi-signature aspect, which we do have the code implemented today in V1, but I don't think any wallets use it yet, quickly came up against a wall. And this is a wall that admittedly is well documented. It actually existed reflected in the Arcturus implementations as well, in that the key images that we mentioned before in a multi-sig scenario are not impossible to generate and restore on a multi-party basis, but man, it's a lot more difficult than what it probably should be compared to what it is today. And even the possibilities that exist for constructing it are, I want to call it proof of concept, and I'm not trying to discount any work that anybody's done on the topic, but it is very proof of concept, and we don't know how secure that would be to do that if implemented in those ways. So there's a pretty good chance, in all honesty, that both for TurtleCoin and Arcturus, if it was still on the table, that multi-signature transactions wouldn't be possible, so it's not something that we could do, at least not in a safe way. So kind of summing it up real quick, kind of thought about it the last week, and I'm like, man, we don't really have anybody using multi-sig right now, so it's not much of a hit if we don't have it in V2. But at the same time, it's something that I would like to see people use more, that I'm sure that the services would appreciate that we had better support for multi-sig in our wallets. I'd hate I'd hate to cut our legs off by continuing down this path and not knowing if there's ever going to be an answer for it.
Multi-sig is so important to me. For Karai too, a lot of the plans that I had with regards to collateralizing Turtle to fund a Karai network had to do with multi.
Exactly, and that's just one use case. I mean, some of the stuff I've roughed together over the last couple of years, especially since I kind of figured out the math behind the multi-sig stuff, it's been foundational, or it's been imperative that I have that multi-sig aspect to it. So it's important in my mind that we can keep it. And even taking a look over at the Monero team, they're taking a look at triptych going, man, if we can't figure out multi-sig, we're probably not going to use triptych.
I can imagine.
Because it's that important to those guys as well. Exactly. So I kind of took a step back over the last week or so and said, man, I don't know that this is going to get figured out. And like I said, I don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot and lock us up in a way that we can't do this, or that we have to move backwards to get support for it. So after careful consideration, I've kind of come to the determination that we probably won't be using triptych at launch. I've left the code in the repository, in the crypto repository, just in case we want to do some playing around and check it out. The implementation does work. It is consistent, and I've got some unit tests in there, all that kind of good stuff, but I still don't have an answer for how to generate those multi-party key images, at least not what's built in there today. But what does work, that multi-sig is built for in that crypto library, and we have no problem generating key images because they're pretty much generated the same way as we do with today's multi-signature key images, is CLSAG, and I think I mentioned it briefly. I shouldn't really say briefly, but I talked about it a little bit more in depth in some of the previous articles. CLSAG has signatures that are about half the size of the Boromine ring signatures that we use today, which is good, but again, when I'm talking about signature size, I gotta be honest, it really doesn't matter how big the signatures are at this point because
we're pruning them.
Exactly. Once they're validated and they're verified, they get the hell out of Dodge. So the size doesn't matter at that point. What really comes into play there, even from the validation aspect, is how long do they take to generate the signature and how quickly do they verify? And in my rudimentary testing that I did so far, the triptych signatures take like 3 times longer than the CLSAGs to generate when I'm using like 256 ring participants or a ring size of 256 or 512. It takes like 3 times longer to generate the triptych, which doesn't sound that bad because of course we're only doing that on critic and transaction, but it is deplorable because I still have to do signatures for every input in a transaction. So it's 3 times longer for God knows how many more signatures, in a transaction. So it's definitely a benefit in some aspects that we'll get faster generation times out of the CLSAG. The verification times, the validation times, triptych are right around the same, in all honesty, as CLSAG. So yeah, the size is smaller, but again, doesn't matter. And it's pretty straightforward in my mind at that point that we can fall back to CLSAG. We can still blow up the ring sizes, however we want, because ultimately it's the storage cost that would drive drive that discussion, right? And some of the lookup cost of looking up those keys, but that would have been the same across all of them. It's at storage cost, but because of the way that we're going to be pruning the offsets and all that information, it doesn't matter, so it doesn't matter what we use. Another huge benefit of some of the restructuring that I've done in how we're pruning things is that we can change the ring size to whatever size we want in the future without affecting how big the transaction is that's stored on chain, on disk storage, which is going to help us keep the fees relatively the same. So even if it comes along that, hey, look, in a year, there does become an answer for the triptych side of the equation, and we are able to switch to those key images, it wouldn't be a pretty switch, but we could technically pull that switch off with rather minimal, impact, because again, we don't have to do full validation from day zero when you're syncing in the future, because all that information's trimmed, it's pruned, it doesn't exist. We don't have to validate it again. It makes it very easy in the future for us to be able to swap things out. Hopefully I'm making some sense here and I'm not just rambling for
complete
the sake of
sense.
rambling.
Making complete sense. So I think the question that's on everybody's mind right now is, if you put multi-sig into triptych, does it become polyptych?
I haven't had enough coffee today for that.
So as you might know, triptych is a three-piece art installation where the three pieces of art are stitched side by side. Anything over 3 is considered a polyptych. 4 would be a quadriptych. 5 would be a pentiptych.
Nope, I got you 100% now. Yeah, I don't know the answer.
It's about the only thing I remember from art history.
I don't think I ever took an art history class.
Well, look, some of us went to community college.
You're right. I did go to community college for the first 2 years, but I don't remember taking an art history class because I took classes that interested me and I would find useful to my future career.
I'm picking up what you're putting down.
Yeah, that underwater basket weaving class, that was definitely an elective, buddy.
Are you telling me my gender studies degree is worthless?
I'm not going to say that it's worthless, but maybe.
Listen, they said that I could be manager of my Walgreens any year now.
But dude, don't you have to work there first?
Maybe.
Helps just a little bit. I mean, standing outside restocking the red box isn't quite the same as working there.
That's a very patriarchal way to look at it.
You're offending users in the chat. I can hear it already.
I can already hear the hate mail.
Fair enough.
I will not stand for this. I need to speak to the admins.
Just sit down.
Man, is it just me, or have people been acting up a little bit more lately? I've been seeing a lot of hands pressed against hips, and it's almost like they double down now.
So, I was thinking that as well, that I think even Z kind of called it out, and he's like, man, what the hell's going on here? And I asked him if he had been living under a rock the last 3 months, right? And but I will say that over the last week or so, it's definitely been getting rougher, and in my
folks are getting testy.
Yeah, in my mind, it's funny because I've been kind of busy with my day job activities the last week and a half, so I haven't been able to watch the chat as much, but so I guess I've been a little more lenient, and I tend to be the bad cop. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Definitely. It seems like I don't know. Maybe we opened ourselves up to a different social channel or something recently. I'm not sure, but it's like an increase of people who want to they only want to have DM conversation, or it'll be like they just want to talk about price, or they'll come in with their hands pressed against their hips about something and expect us to reach into our developer bag of tricks and fix it right there on the spot.
Maybe, and it's just me taking a guess at maybe it was something I did. I mean, I have been posting teacup memes on TikTok. I don't know.
Like this guy here. Okay, look, here's an example right here. This guy goes, "Do you guys give AMA?" I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Would you want to do it in a subreddit of around 10,000 people sometime?" I said, "Which one?" Because I already knew. And he goes, "PM." just he doesn't even say, "Can I PM you?" He just says, "PM," or "Should I post it here?" And I said, "We don't PM here." And he says, "It's called crypto moon calls." I said, "Oh, lol, no, absolutely not."
What a douche.
I can't even begin to just understand. Read the room, man. Read the room.
Yeah, and I already showed him the door once today already, and he came back and he kept it up. You know what that means?
What does that even communicate to our users whenever we show up in a place like that? And what type of users do we accumulate by going to a place like that?
You know what I mean? Crypto moon calls? Oh, I think that's the target audience of this particular user.
That would not even be a fruitful AMA. Like, what could we possibly talk about? What do we possibly have to identify with? What could we possibly have in common, you know? And that's not to be disrespectful. I'm sure that there's some smart people there and some fun people there and that type of thing. But given that we somewhat represent the brand and we've so far made it this far without capitulating to any type of market pressures and things like that, why would we suddenly begin pandering to a market of people that we've branded consistently as the undesirables? We're looking for the users that are not in it for the speculation, you know? We want the ones that are actually in it for the tech. And I know those are few and far in between, but the more of those productive users that we have, the more development power we'll end up having, the more interested people will be able to have and teach about what we do and, you know, grow to help us out. I just don't think that the whole moon crowd is there to stick around. I think that as soon as the price moves one way or the other, they're in or they're out, and kind of like a waste of effort all at once for nothing.
I agree 100% with that sentence. Hopefully someday these guys will.
You know, and I'm not to say that one of the other users can't go on there. You know, it's just not going to be core team, you know?
I agree.
Yeah, I'm not saying that nobody else can go on there. You know, what people do with their own time is their own time, but I'm not gonna be there. And that's, you know, I'm not trying to pick any shit with them or start any flame wars or anything like that, or cause anybody to sell their massive 2,000 turtle stack and run of the exchanges crying about it. But I'm just saying, you know, like it's kind of contrary to who we are to go pandering to that type of market. You know, they're gonna be in or they're gonna be out. If they see a profit opportunity, then they'll be in, and if they don't, then they won't. And I don't think us catering to that market or going over there and participating in it is gonna improve or, you know, hurt those chances at all. So thanks, but no thanks. What a weird, it's so weird whenever people, you talk to random people that come in the chat and like they immediately want to pull you into a broom closet to have a conversation with you. It's like they realize as soon as you're a developer, they're like, oh, wait, hey, come here in this little side room. Let's have this private conversation. It's like, dude, we just met. All right. We don't even know each other. We don't have anything in common. The fact that you want to PM me in a broom closet, you know, already says that you're up to no good. If you can't say it in front of everybody else, then you're probably up to no good. The answer is probably no. I can't think of one time when it actually needed to be a private message. Not even once.
Yeah, I can't think of any offhand either. But the funnier part is, you know, in all honesty, is usually we can tell that they want to get us in a broom closet within the first 7 characters that they type.
Yeah, and you know, it's typically like you'll still be typing the hey, welcome to the chat, and they'll be like, hello. It's like they walk in and they just like kick open the door and, you know, start flapping their suit lapel around. You can always tell too as soon as they walk in.
Well, yeah, you can smell it coming through the doorway.
Anyway, I think that's about all I got for today, man. I could tell you're falling asleep over there. Everything good?
Yeah, I'm fully awake. I was just kind of laughing and thinking, and in all honesty, I think I got to turn up the air conditioner before too long here because it's starting to heat up. So yeah, it might be nap time. I don't know, but yeah, I think we're good for this episode. And as always, we will be back again with more TurtleCoin news.
All right, see you later, guys. See ya.